Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over the MLB games scheduled for Friday, July 28th, 2023. Now if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your baseball picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, including my $19 rundown best bet, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Friday in Major League Baseball. First up, it's the Miami Marlins taking on the Detroit Tigers. Reese Olson and Braxton Garrett are your starters. You know, the Tigers let me down on Thursday in that doubleheader against the Angels, but I still think there's value with them in this spot on the road. You know, Braxton Garrett just hasn't been the same lately. His last two starts against the Orioles and Rockies, he's only able to go 7 2/3 combined in those two games, giving up 10 earned runs, 13 base hits, and 3 home runs as well. 2 losses for Miami in the end. And yes, you know, Reese Olson struggled in his last start against the Padres. He gave up those 5 runs, but 2 home runs to Juan Soto that were, you know, just absolute bombs, 440 and 460, I believe. And then Jake Cronenworth hit a triple. You know, these are powerful lefty bats in the lineup that hurt Olson. The Marlins don't really have those guys. I mean, Luis Arias is a lefty, but more of a contact hitter. Jesus Sanchez went down with an injury in Wednesday's game against the Rays. He might not be available for this game. And really, the rest of the, you know, the more powerful bats in this Marlins lineup are righties, guys like Soler, De La Cruz. So I do think Olson bounces back here. You know, he was pitching pretty well for Detroit up until that start against San Diego. And I think the Tigers do enough here against Braxton Garrett to win this game in the end. So maybe take the Tigers in the first 5 if you're not in love with the bullpen after the doubleheader. But I'll take the Tigers in the full game as well on the money line. Next up, it's the Cleveland Guardians taking on the Chicago White Sox. No official starter for Cleveland right now, but we should see Touki Toussaint going for the White Sox. Not my favorite game with the missing information for Cleveland's pitching strategy here. And Touki Toussaint, you know, he's been an opener, he's been a starter. He hasn't fared too well in the starting pitching role recently. I don't love his matchup here against Cleveland, a team that doesn't strike out much against right-handed pitchers, and Toussaint's control's been off a little bit this season and really in his career as well. If I had to pick, I would take Cleveland or pass in this game altogether, but probably a game I'm staying away from. Next up, it's the New York Yankees taking on the Baltimore Orioles. Garrett Cole and Grayson Rodriguez are your starters. Grayson Rodriguez, one of his best starts last time out against the Rays. He goes 5 2/3, only gives up 3 base hits and only 2 runs. No home runs, 6 strikeouts in a 6-5 Orioles win. Now, he's facing Garrett Cole here, but the Yankees lineup, I just don't think is going to be able to back up Garrett Cole in this game, even though he's been sharp on the mound with a 2.78 ERA, solid numbers on the road. The Orioles have the much better numbers offensively against right-handed pitchers in the last 30 days compared to New York. The Yankees are 28th in baseball in the last month in isolated power against righties, 25th in team OPS. I got to take the Baltimore Orioles here at a pretty good price at Camden Yards. I think right now the Orioles are the much better team, so give me the O's on the money line. Next up, we see the Philadelphia Phillies taking on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Zach Wheeler and Mitch Keller are your starters. It's kind of funny. I mentioned the last time Wheeler pitched, and we talked about him on the rundown, I talked about how he wasn't really pitching that well, but the Phillies were able to back him up in the run support department and win a lot of his games. I mean, he had 2 quality starts against the Padres and Marlins before that game against Cleveland, but before that, he gave up 4 earned runs in 5 innings against the Nationals. The Phillies still were able to win that game 19-4 in the end. Before that, he gave up 5 runs against the New York Mets in 5 1/3. The Phillies still won that game 7-6. So even when Wheeler was not pitching at his best, the Phillies were there to back him up. Unfortunately for Wheeler, he had a really good game his last start against the Guardians. He goes 7 innings, 1 run, 8 strikeouts, but the Phillies were not there in that game. They scored no runs. They got shut out 1-0 the final score, and the 1-run score was basically an error. It wasn't officially an error because nobody touched the ball, but it was a pop-up that fell in between Bryson Stott and Nick Castellanos in the outfield, and Rosario was able to score from first base with 2 outs. So, you know, interesting note there, but I do think Wheeler is still the better option in this game. Mitch Keller is really struggling right now. His last 2 starts, Angels and Guardians, 11 innings combined, 19 base hits, 14 earned runs, and 5 home runs allowed. One of those starts was at PNC Park. The other one was on the road. The Phillies also have a big advantage, in my opinion, in the bullpen game. So even though the Pirates have actually better numbers than Philadelphia does against righties in the last 30 days, the Phillies have a big advantage in the starting pitching and the bullpen side of things. So give me the Philadelphia Phillies here on the money line on the road. Next up, we see the Los Angeles Angels taking on the Toronto Blue Jays. It's going to be Lucas Giolito's Angels debut. He'll be facing Kevin Gausman on the other side for Toronto. You know, I think Giolito will be able to pitch well in this Angels rotation going forward. I just don't love his matchup here against the Blue Jays. A tough lineup on the road. We know Giolito was not pitching too well on the road when he was a member of the White Sox, and he just faced this Blue Jays team at the beginning of the month. He pitched well overall, especially in the early innings, but you could tell in the middle innings, the Blue Jays were starting to pick things up on him. They scored a couple runs in the middle innings. They won that game 4-3, the final. In Giolito's last 4 starts as a member of the White Sox lost all 4 of those games. So I do think Giolito could be in trouble here, especially, Gausman is really tough to beat when he's pitching at Rogers Center. He's got that ERA at 2.58 at home this season. The Angels' bullpen has not been great in the last 30 days, a very high ERA, not the best expected numbers either. So give me the Toronto Blue Jays here on the run line, laying those 1.5 runs. Next up, it's the Washington Nationals taking on the New York Mets. Mackenzie Gore and Max Scherzer are your starters. I think there's value here with the Washington Nationals. I mean, Mackenzie Gore, last start against the San Francisco Giants, 5 innings, no runs, 8 strikeouts, one of his best starts of the season in a 6-1 Nationals win. And when you look at the other side, the New York Mets offensively, they have really not done much against lefties. We saw them struggle against Carlos Rodon in the Subway Series, and in the last 30 days, 28th in baseball in team OPS, 27th in isolated power. Honestly, similar numbers to those San Francisco Giants that Gore just dominated against. So I do think the Mets struggle offensively, and that opens the door for a run line cover or potentially an outright win for the Nationals, who, Max Scherzer's been better at Citi Field than on the road, but the Nationals do a really good job at limiting strikeouts. I think they'll be able to get to Max Scherzer for a couple of runs here, and that could be enough in a low-scoring game for a run line cover. So give me the Washington Nationals plus the 1.5 runs with a sprinkle on the money line as well. Next up, we see the Milwaukee Brewers taking on the Atlanta Braves. Yonny Chirinos making his Braves debut, and Adrian Houser on the other side for Milwaukee. I'm going to take the over in this game. Yonny Chirinos was placed on waivers by the Rays, I think for good reason, and he was struggling, had a 4.02 ERA overall this year, and some expected numbers that suggest even more regression in his game going forward. His last outing as a Ray, back on July 16th, gave up 3 home runs against the Kansas City Royals of all teams. So for a Brewers team, it's really, competitive right now, trying to win that NL Central, and, offense has actually done pretty well lately. I do think they'll be able to get to Yonny Chirinos, but Adrian Houser doesn't have the best matchup here. I mean, he just faced the Braves last week on July 22nd. He pitched pretty well in that game. Quality start, 6 innings, 3 runs, 10 strikeouts. But, this is a very good Braves lineup. Against right-handed pitchers, some of the best numbers in baseball, power-wise, OPS-wise, and even a low strikeout rate to go with it. Facing the same pitcher they just saw last week, I just don't think it's going to end well for Houser. Even though this Brewers bullpen's made some improvements, I still like the over in this game with a lean towards the Brewers because I do think they find a W in the end. Next up, it's the Minnesota Twins taking on the Kansas City Royals. We're going to see Sonny Gray and Brady Singer on the mound in this one. Now, Sonny Gray got off to such a good start in 2023. In the month of April, he had 6 starts. He had 35 innings of work, 41 strikeouts, and a .77 ERA. The Twins went on to win 5 of those 6 games. So, Gray was off to such a good start and still having a good season overall, 3.1 ERA overall in 2023. However, since the beginning of May, Gray has had 14 starts, and although he's pitched pretty well in those games, the Twins are still 4-10, very not profitable, 4-10 on the money line in those ball games. So, that's a concern. I think Sonny Gray has been a little bit overvalued in most of his outings since that beginning of the season. And Brady Singer is in great form right now. His last start against the Yankees, 6 innings, 2 runs, 9 strikeouts. He was able to go 8 innings against the Tampa Bay Rays and win that game for Kansas City 8-4 in the previous outing. I think, Singer's probably pitching his best baseball of the year. He's had good numbers at Kauffman Stadium with a 4.66 ERA, much better than his current 5.55 overall ERA this season. So I think Singer is honestly right now the better starting pitcher, and I do think the Twins are yet again overvalued with Gray on the mound. Give me the Kansas City Royals getting a really nice price at plus money on the money line. Next up, we see the Tampa Bay Rays taking on the Houston Astros with Shane McClanahan and Christian Javier as the projected starters. I'm not in love with this game right now. I am leaning towards the over. I think the total set just a little bit too low. Christian Javier has been better as of late, his last 2 starts, but still, the control's been an issue. 6 walks allowed his last start against the Oakland A's in a 4-1 Astros loss. And before his last 2 outings, we saw him give up 8 earned runs and 6 earned runs to the Rangers and Cardinals. Now, all 4 of those games were on the road. Now he's going back to Minute Maid Park, where he's been better this season, but he's facing a Tampa Bay Rays lineup that has been solid against righties for the most part in 2023. On the other side, Shane McClanahan just hasn't been very dominant lately. We saw his last start against the Orioles, 5 earned runs and 4 innings of work. He had one really bad inning, and the Orioles went on to win that game 6-5. The Astros do have a solid lineup against lefties. We know they got some big bats back in the lineup, and guys like Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez. And when you look at Houston in the last 30 days, the Astros are 6th in isolated power, 8th in team OPS against lefties with a low strikeout rate to go with it, so I don't love the matchup for Shane McClanahan. Give me the over here in Houston, Tampa Bay, maybe the first 5 over because, you got 2 solid bullpens, maybe not a ton of scoring late, but I still think we get over the full game over as well. Next up, we see the Chicago Cubs taking on the St. Louis Cardinals. No official starter for Chicago in this one. We're going to see Jordan Montgomery for the Cardinals. Similar to that Guardians-White Sox game, this is not my favorite game on the board. Montgomery just pitched against the Cubs. He struggled in that game. He was pitching pretty well up until that point, but 6 innings, 5 runs, actually 5 earned runs, 7 total runs allowed to Chicago in a 7-2 Cubs win. It was one of the worst starts for Montgomery in the last couple of months or so, and now he's facing the same lineup again. Probably not a great spot for him, but this Cubs bullpen's also not been great. So for me, a tough game to read. I would lean towards the Cubs on the money line, but maybe a play on the over as well. Next up, we go to Coors Field as the Athletics take on the Rockies. J.P. Sears and Kyle Freeland are your starters. Going to be the first career start for Sears at Coors Field. We know it's never easy for any starting pitcher to make their debut at Coors, especially facing a Rockies team that lately has been hitting lefties pretty well. I mean, at the beginning of the season, we know the Rockies were struggling mightily against Southpaws, but now in the last 30 days, they're 13th in team OPS and 8th in isolated power against lefties. And even on the road, the Rockies were scoring some runs against some tough left-handed starting pitchers. So I do think Sears, who his last start gave up 3 home runs against the Astros and 5 earned runs and 5 2/3, could be in trouble in this game. Kyle Freeland, not my favorite option on the mound, but he has a lot of Coors Field experience. He's pitched actually better at home this season than he has been on the road. He's coming off an injury, which, isn't the best spot, but I still think the Rockies have the much better lineup in this game. So give me the Colorado Rockies here on the money line. Next up, we see the Seattle Mariners taking on the Arizona Diamondbacks. We're going to see Logan Gilbert and Tommy Henry on the mound in this one. Now, the Mariners don't have the best numbers against lefties in the last month, and Tommy Henry's actually pitched pretty well at Chase Field this season. 42 innings, a 3 ERA, but only 24 strikeouts and 17 walks allowed is pretty concerning for me. And I'm also just concerned with the way the Diamondbacks have looked in general lately. I mean, we saw them lose another series to the St. Louis Cardinals. Before that, they got swept by the Cincinnati Reds. And, I think if this is a close game late, which it could be, Logan Gilbert's been solid on the mound on the road this year, a 6-1 record, 3.26 ERA in about 66 innings away from T-Mobile Park. I think the big advantage in the later innings goes to the Mariners in the bullpen because this Diamondbacks bullpen in the last month, a 6.1 ERA with the 4th highest Sierra in baseball, very high xFIP as well, while the Mariners the 6th best Sierra in the league in the bullpen. So give me the Seattle Mariners here on the money line on the road. Next up, we see the Texas Rangers taking on the San Diego Padres. Dane Dunning and Joe Musgrove are your starters. I'm tempted to take the Rangers at this plus money price, but I just can't get there with Dane Dunning right now, who has struggled notably. His last start against the Dodgers, he only went 3 innings of work. He still gave up 7 base hits, 5 earned runs, and 2 home runs. That was a 16-3 Rangers loss. And, I do think the Padres, when you look at their numbers against righties, pretty solid in the last month, OPS and isolated power-wise. I do think Dunning could struggle, but I also don't love Joe Musgrove in this spot, who wasn't his best in his last game against the Detroit Tigers. It was a quality start, but he gave up 7 base hits and 2 home runs in a 3-1 San Diego loss, facing a Rangers team that's got much better numbers than the Detroit Tigers do against righties in the last month and overall this season. Texas is 3rd in baseball in team OPS, 6th in isolated power against righties with a low strikeout rate to go with it. So I like the over here. I think it's a pretty low total because Joe Musgrove's on the mound, but give me the over here in San Diego, Texas. Next up, we go to Los Angeles as the Dodgers take on the Reds. Brandon Williamson and Bobby Miller are your starters. I don't love this matchup for Brandon Williamson, who has been better as of late than he was at the beginning of the season, but he's also had some pretty beneficial matchups. His last 2 starts against the Diamondbacks and the Giants, 2 teams that are struggling offensively right now and have also not been great against lefties in general in 2023. Now you're going into Dodger Stadium facing a very tough Dodger lineup that has hit lefties well all season. I do think Williamson struggles early. Bobby Miller, he's kind of had an up and down season thus far, but he has been better as of late. Another quality start in his last game against the Rangers. Very tough lineup there. 6 innings, 3 runs, 6 strikeouts. That was that 16-3 Dodgers win. The Dodgers are 4-1 in his last 5 starts, with 3 of those 4 wins being run line covers as well. I'll take the Dodgers on the run line in this game as well, laying those 1.5 runs. The final game for Friday's card in Major League Baseball, it's the Boston Red Sox taking on the San Francisco Giants. Cutter Crawford and Logan Webb are your starters in this one. I think there's value with the Red Sox in this game. I mean, I still don't love this Giants lineup right now, even though they scored 8 runs against the A's in that final game of that Oakland series. You know, that's an A's team. It's been one of the worst teams in baseball this year. And San Francisco in the last month is still 29th and 25th in OPS and isolated power against righties, with a 28.3% strikeout rate as well, second highest in the league. The Red Sox are second in baseball behind only the Dodgers in team OPS against righties in the last month, 7th in isolated power. Cutter Crawford didn't have his best outing his last start against the Mets, but before that was pitching pretty well for the Red Sox. And Logan Webb, even though he's been better at Oracle Park and his last couple of games have been on the road, he still is not in good form going into this game. Gave up 6 earned runs against the Nationals his last start in a 10-1 Nationals win. I got to take the Red Sox here on the money line on the road 10 tonight. And that's it. Those are the games for Friday in baseball. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your baseball picks in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bet, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.